There are things that happen inside a locker room that the cameras never catch. Not because anyone is hiding them. Not because they are shameful or controversial or the kind of thing that needs to be kept from the public. But because some moments are simply too human, too raw, too quietly profound to survive the transformation into broadcast content. They live only in the memory of the people who were there. And then, sometimes, one of those people speaks. In a recent interview with American media, Shohei Ohtani spoke. He described what happened inside the locker room on the night that Freddie Freeman hit 2 home runs in a single game. 2 home runs that carried with them a weight that went far beyond baseball. 2 swings that meant something enormous, not just to the team, not just to the crowd, not just to the sport, but to Freeman himself, personally, deeply, in a way that everyone in that stadium instinctively understood without needing it explained. Freeman was in tears. And Ohtani, the most quietly observed man in professional baseball, a man whose words in public are carefully chosen and whose emotions are controlled with the same precision he applies to a 97-mile-per-hour fastball, walked up to him. And said something unexpected. Something that, according to those who heard it, nobody saw coming. Something that didn't match the image. Something that broke through every carefully maintained surface and reached the human being underneath. Today, we go inside that locker room. We examine those words. And we ask the question that this moment demands. Who, exactly, is Shohei Ohtani, when the game is over and the helmet is off and there is nothing left to perform? Before we can understand what Ohtani said, we need to understand what Freeman was feeling. Because Freddie Freeman hitting 2 home runs in a single game is, on its surface, a baseball story. A great player having a great night. The kind of performance that gets added to a highlight file and referenced in future broadcasts as evidence of sustained excellence. But this was not just a baseball story. Freeman had been carrying something heavy. The kind of weight that doesn't show up on a stat sheet and cannot be measured by exit velocity or launch angle or any of the other modern metrics that baseball uses to quantify performance. It was personal weight. Family weight. The kind of burden that sits in a man's chest regardless of whether he is standing in the batter's box or sitting in a hospital waiting room or lying awake at 3 in the morning wondering what the future holds. People who know Freeman describe a man who compartmentalizes with extraordinary discipline. Who shows up. Who prepares. Who competes at the highest level even when the circumstances of his life off the field would give any reasonable person every excuse to be elsewhere, mentally and emotionally, during the game. But compartmentalization has limits. And on the night of 2 home runs, something cracked open. The crowd felt it first, that wordless, atmospheric shift that happens when a moment in a baseball game becomes something more than a baseball game. When the cheering carries a different frequency. When the tears on a player's face don't feel out of place but instead feel like the only honest response to what just happened. Freeman was crying. And in the locker room afterward, in that sacred, private space where the performance ends and the person remains, Ohtani found him. Here is what makes Ohtani's words so striking. It is not simply what he said. It is the gap between what everyone expected him to say, what the image, the reputation, the carefully maintained public persona of Shohei Ohtani would have predicted, and what actually came out of his mouth. We have been trained, as observers of Ohtani, to expect a certain kind of communication from him. Thoughtful. Measured. Respectful. The words of a man who considers carefully before speaking and never, under any circumstances, says more than is necessary. His public interviews are precise. His reactions to big moments are controlled. He smiles at the right times, nods at the right times, gives the kind of answers that are genuine without being vulnerable. This was different. What he revealed to American media, and the fact that he chose to reveal it at all is itself significant, was a remark that landed sideways. That came from a direction nobody in that locker room anticipated. That made the people around him pause, look at each other, and then look back at Ohtani with a kind of quiet recalibration happening behind their eyes. Because what he said wasn't a compliment. It wasn't a formal acknowledgement of Freeman's performance. It wasn't the kind of thing you say when you are performing the role of supportive teammate. It was something personal. Something specific. Something that could only have come from a man who had been paying close, genuine, sustained attention, not to Freeman's statistics or his batting mechanics or his professional trajectory, but to Freeman himself. As a person. As someone carrying weight that baseball cannot fix. In that moment, Ohtani wasn't a two-way superstar standing in a locker room. He was simply a person who saw another person and knew exactly what to say. This is the part of the story that people miss. Moments like this, the right words at the right moment, the thing that breaks through when everything else would have bounced off, do not happen by accident. They are not the product of natural charm or social instinct alone. They are the result of something that requires real investment, real presence, real sustained attention over time. You cannot say the right thing to someone you haven't been watching. And Ohtani, it turns out, watches his teammates with the same meticulous attention he applies to opposing pitchers. Those who have spent time around him in the clubhouse describe a man who listens more than he speaks. Who notices things, small things, quiet things, the shifts in energy that most people miss because they are too busy managing their own presence in the room. He knows when someone is off. He knows when the smile doesn't quite reach the eyes. He knows when a teammate is competing at full effort while simultaneously carrying something that has nothing to do with the game. This is not a skill that is talked about when Ohtani's name comes up. The conversation is almost always about velocity and bat speed and positional value and historical comparison. These are legitimate conversations. But they leave out the dimension that, according to his closest teammates, is the one that makes sharing a clubhouse with him feel different from sharing a clubhouse with other elite players. He pays attention to people. Really pays attention. The kind that accumulates over time into genuine knowledge of who a person is, what they need, what they fear, what they are carrying, and what, on a specific night in a specific locker room, they need to hear. That knowledge is what walked up to Freeman and opened its mouth. And what came out was unexpected. Because genuine attention almost always produces unexpected results, it sees things that scripts and formulas and conventional responses miss entirely. Let's pause here and acknowledge something that matters. Men crying in professional sports locker rooms is still, in 2025, not a common or comfortable public topic. The culture of elite athletics, particularly in baseball, with its long history of stoicism and toughness as professional virtues, does not traditionally make space for visible vulnerability. You control your emotions. You compartmentalize. You process privately and present publicly with composure. Freeman's tears, visible to his teammates in that locker room, were therefore not a small thing. They were a breaking open. A moment of genuine human vulnerability in a space where genuine human vulnerability is often the most courageous possible act, not because it is dangerous, but because it is so contrary to everything the culture of the sport trains its participants to perform. And how a teammate responds to that kind of moment says everything. Some players look away. Not out of cruelty, out of the deeply ingrained impulse to give a person space, to avoid making vulnerability more uncomfortable by witnessing it too directly. Some offer the conventional phrases, "Great game, you deserved it," "Incredible performance." True things. Safe things. Things that honor the baseball moment without quite reaching the human moment underneath it. Ohtani walked toward it. He walked toward Freeman's tears rather than around them. He chose engagement over comfort, his own comfort, specifically, the very human comfort of not having to find the exact right words for an emotionally charged moment between teammates. He found the words anyway. And they were unexpected. And they landed. Here is a detail worth examining carefully. Ohtani spoke about this moment to American media. He didn't have to. The locker room is protected space. What happens inside it stays inside it by unspoken agreement, not because of any formal rule but because the culture of professional sports treats that space as sacred. What is seen in the locker room, what is said in the locker room, belongs to the people who were there. Ohtani chose to bring it out. This choice is itself a form of communication. A deliberate act of making something visible that could have remained invisible. And when a man as private, as controlled, as carefully measured in his public communication as Shohei Ohtani chooses to share something personal, to pull back one of the curtains that he keeps firmly closed in almost every other public context, the act of sharing is as meaningful as the content. He wanted Freeman's moment to be known. Not his own words, exactly, though he shared them. But Freeman's moment. The tears. The wait. The 2 home runs that meant more than 2 home runs. The fact that a man was carrying something enormous and still showed up and still competed and still, on that particular night, delivered something that made a stadium hold its breath. Ohtani's interview was, in its own quiet way, a tribute. A deliberate, considered act of saying to the world, you should know what happened in that locker room. You should know who Freddie Freeman is. You should know what those home runs actually meant. That is not the behavior of a man focused on his own story. That is the behavior of a man who understands, deeply, instinctively, in a way that no amount of media training can manufacture, that the most powerful thing he can do with his platform is sometimes simply to shine it on someone else. There is a version of the Ohtani story that is told entirely in numbers. Home runs. Era. WAR. Contract value. Historical comparisons. Milestone markers. The accumulation of statistical evidence for the argument, already largely won, already largely accepted by the serious observers of the sport, that he is one of the most remarkable baseball players who has ever lived. That version of the story is true. It is well documented and rigorously supported and will be told for decades in whatever form baseball history takes in the years ahead. But there is another version. It is told not in numbers but in moments. In the things that happen when the cameras are pointed elsewhere. In what a man does with his attention, his words, his presence, his genuine care for the people around him, the teammates who share his locker room, the younger players who are watching him without quite knowing what they are learning, the people carrying weight that baseball cannot fix. The unexpected remark in the locker room belongs to that version. The version where the standard is not measured in wins and losses or batting average or earned run average but in something harder to quantify and easier to feel. The version where the question is not what kind of baseball player you are but what kind of person you are when the game is over and the equipment is put away and someone you care about is sitting across from you with tears on their face. Ohtani's answer to that question, delivered in a locker room, on a night when Freeman was still processing the emotional weight of something much larger than 2 home runs, was unexpected. It was specific. It was personal. It came from genuine attention paid over genuine time. And it landed. Baseball will remember Freeman's 2 home runs. The statistics are logged. The footage is archived. The moment exists permanently in the record of the sport, available to anyone who wants to find it, the bat speed, the exit velocity, the arc of the ball against the stadium lights. But in a locker room, later that night, something happened that will not show up in any archive. A man who carries the weight of being the most watched player in baseball walked across a room and said something that nobody expected. Something that came from attention and care and the kind of genuine human presence that cannot be manufactured or practiced or performed. Freeman was in tears. And Ohtani, who controls everything, the fastball, the swing, the public persona, the careful management of a historic career, chose, in that moment, to let go of the control. To simply be present. To say the true thing rather than the expected thing. The unexpected remark. The words that made a strong man cry harder, not from sadness but from the particular, overwhelming feeling of being truly, completely, unexpectedly seen. This is who Shohei Ohtani is when the helmet is off. Not a two-way player. Not a statistical anomaly. Not a historic figure to be analyzed and measured and compared to the legends who came before. Just a man in a locker room. Saying exactly the right thing.